All right. So today we just want to see how best we can present our work to an academic audience. An academic audience could be in the case where you have a panel, or it could also be like you've gone to a conference, you are speaking to people. It could be even in your paper, you are publishing a paper. Of course, the whole academic community is an audience, and you need to um, present it clearly to them as much as possible. So I'll try and take it from different aspects today. At some point, it will look like I'm presenting for a thesis. At some point, it will look like I'm presenting for a poster. At some point, it will look like, but of course, as much as possible, I'll try and touch all the practical ones. And for those of us who are presenting very soon to an audience like a professor or something, it will also help you. So the first thing I want to talk about today is that whatever we try to show an audience or an academic community, we should know that it's like a story. Okay, so for us or for people who have read stories before, you always want to see a story that kind of looks easy to read, and you don't have to be able to tell the end from the beginning. Okay, so that kind of suspense is what we need. And this is what your presentation or whatever output you are giving to the academic community should look like. So if you can see my whiteboard, can anyone confirm if you can see my whiteboard?
Yes, I can see.
All right, thank you very much for the confirmation. Um, I'll take basically 6 aspects, okay, for every plot or for every movie or for every story that we watch. It has 6 basic aspects that mostly is used. Of course, everyone has their own kind of elements that they use, but as much as possible, let's try and narrow our academic story that we are trying to present to 6 basic elements. Okay. So first of all, I'll need some characters. Okay. So if you are writing a story, you always need some characters, right? Um, you need a setting, right? A setting. Okay. So where is the movie being shot, or in which particular time? Is it in the olden days? Is it 21st century? Is it in the future? You need some tension somehow, right? Some tension to make the story very interesting and make the audience kind of look like what is going to happen, what is going to happen. You need some action, right? We all like the action movies. You need some climax, and then you need some resolution. So this is the aspects that I want to, or the perspective that I want us to look at most of our academic outputs, be it a thesis or something. Okay. So for example, we have characters in a movie, we have the main character, we have the hero, we have the villain and all that. In our particular thesis, in our particular output, we need characters. And the characters could be the variables, right? In this particular scenario, where the variables could be the independent variable, let's say IV, let's call it IV, the dependent variable, right? We could also have the control variables for those of us who use control variables, right? So these are some of the characters. And of course, your dependent variable could be the supporting character or the main character, the independent, right? So everything is hovering around that particular variable. So you have to know in your storytelling or in your output, what is your dependent variable? What's your independent variable? And what's your control variable? And how does this become the main character or the supporting character? We need things like the setting. So the setting gives us the background, right? And as much as possible, you telling the audience whatever background it is, they must have some affiliation to it, or they can connect to that particular background. So even if you are with talking to academia or people from research, let's say professor or anybody who is within that field, you still need to give them something they can connect with. For example, if I'm doing machine learning, okay, and I always use machine learning because it's quite popular in most fields now. No matter how somebody is good in machine learning, you always have to draw them back into that particular field in which you are talking about. So the background always could come from a broad perspective, and then you narrow down to a specific one, right? So the background being a perspective wise, right? You are coming from a very broad perspective. So what's happening in the field of machine learning? And then you narrow it down to what? Your particular field. So how is it being used in that particular field? So this could give us the background, right? Some people also would want to use things like stating the problem or the scope. Okay, so the scope could be our not really the problem, but the problem could go more to the tension. So let's say the scope or the focus, right? So these are things that could set up the background for our study or for our academic output. And then the tension could be the problems, right? And in that particular perspective of looking at it as a problem, you also look at how are others seeing it? How are others seeing that particular problem? And what do I mean by that? This is from the literature, right? So as much as possible, how is the literature seeing or defining the problem? And then there's some action. The action here being that you tell us the methodology, how you are going to try and solve that problem. And then the climax being the results. And anything after that becomes the resolution. So how you discuss the results and the implications of the study. Right. So this is the idea in which you have, and this is how you want to write your story. So let's see if you can write a very good Nigerian movie today, or a very good, I think there's Mika is here, so I can use Philippines. So the soap operas and the telenovelas, they always use the character, the setting, the tension, the action, the climax, resolution. It's always in the movie, right? So let's see how best we can use this particular approach to convey an idea. So let's say we have a topic like, let's say, anyone can give me a topic and we try and then see how best we can convey this. A very broad topic as much as possible. Maybe not your topic, but similar to what you are doing. Anyone can give me topic. Anyone? Oh, can I be heard? Hello? Oh, okay. Okay, anyone can give me a topic or you can type it. Maybe I just want to use it as a practical example. I didn't prepare a topic in hand for today's session. So if you have a topic, we can use your topic to kind of show the output. Okay, I can be heard. And so I need a topic. Okay. I don't want to use Chinese man today, so let's use a very practical topic and then we move on from there. A very practical topic, as much as possible, closely related to what you are doing, will help us to make it more. I don't want to pull out the impact of managerial make on startups scaling speed. Okay, so let me copy this. Hopefully I can put it here as the character. Okay, the topic. Okay, so this is our topic, the impact of managerial make on startup scaling speed. Make up. Okay, it's make up. Okay, so we've done all we are supposed to do. We know our keywords, we know our problem statement and all that. So what are some of the independent variable that we can test for in such a study? So the impact of managerial makeup. So managerial makeup is my dependent or independent variable. What do you guys think? Is it dependent or is independent? Anyone? The impact of something on something. So which one is the dependent? Which one is the independent? The impact of managerial makeup on startup scaling speed. Okay, so I think let me separate. This side is is one of the variables and the other side is also the other variable. So which of them do you think is the dependent variable? Managerial makeup is the independent variable. Okay, and then any other person? Scaling speed. Okay. Do we all agree? Do we all agree that this one is independent variable and this one is dependent variable? Why is it vanished? Oh, I didn't know this function. Okay, so independent variable and this is dependent variable. Does anyone disagree? Okay, so let's assume that she's right. So independent variable, how is this going to, will it change? Is it possible that in measuring up your dependent variable, trying to find out the impact of the independent on the dependent, is it possible it can change? What do I mean? Sometimes your main character could assume the supporting role because let's say a new hero comes up. So let's say the father dies and then the son rises. So in trying to give us how the characters relate with each other, so first of all, you could look at relation. How does the characters relate with each other, right? Relation. And then of course, how do they evolve with time? This is one way we can try to tell the story. So I don't know how the impact of managerial makeup affects or what we mean by how does a decision-making process, does it make it faster or does it make it slower? So from our own experience, we know that when there's bureaucracy, things become slower and the company basically does not evolve that much, right? So things like managerial makeup would have to move into things like, or it can move into things like leadership. It can now move into things like, that means the style of leadership. So not only about management, but now you are adding a key term into leadership. So how does the independent variable affect the dependent variable? There could be a relation. So if there's bureaucracy, then the startup scaling process would be slower, right? That's their relationship. But in terms of evolving, you realize that now the independent variable changes from a management perspective to, let's say, a leadership perspective, or let's say an organizational perspective. So before you start telling the story, you can let the people or you yourself as a writer know that my independent variable is possible to change, right? So they have that in their mind. It's not like after they read the whole paper and then somewhere in the results, they realize that something pops up. Of course, that could be a surprise. You could keep that as a surprise at the climax, right? In as much as possible to surprise people. But you should know that as a writer before you start writing or before you start designing that PPT. I don't know if that part makes sense. So at the character level, there could be a relationship. So the impact of one on the other. When one goes up, the other one goes down, or they all go up, that kind of relationship. Or there could be that they evolve or they switch. Maybe the dependent variable with time becomes the dependent variable or something else, other variables. I don't know if this makes sense or that someone has a question on characters. Okay, so for setting the background, we have to know where is this particular study going to be held. So maybe we can look at it from a business perspective, or we can look at it from, let's say, a large organization, right? And there's a word startup, but even a large organization, like let's say Google, we could have a branch of it. Let's say they decide to do something like Google autonomous vehicles, right? It's not a full function or it's not what Google is known for, but they now start up something. So how does the impact of such a large body structure like Google affect that particular baby of Google, right? So you can give us the background that is it in a large corporation, is it in a small enterprise, or it's actually like a real startup that is starting from ground zero. So you have to give us the background and how do these variables connect to that background in the perspective. So you take it that, okay, for large organizational bodies, this is the situation. However, in a startup, that's your however now has become the specific or the scope or the focus in which you are putting that particular character. So we know that we are not looking at the leadership or the managerial makeup from a large corporation, but within, let's say, a smaller corporation or a ground zero kind of company. Now you give us the problem, that's the tension. So the problems from your perspective and also from literature, as much as possible, maybe one or two slides show the problem from literature, right? So people have tried to kind of define the problem in a small, or let's say in a large corporation. However, your study would look at it from a smaller corporation, which is a smaller organization, let's say 2 to 10 people. So you are telling us kind of the tension that, and once there's tension, we know that there's an opposing force and there's one that is also what attracting. So in that tension, things will tear apart. And when things tear apart, we have that research gap, right? So at this point, we should be able to find the problem from your perspective, the problem from literature, and then that particular research gap comes in there. So somewhere here, we should see your research gap looking clearly at us, okay, or glaring at us as much as possible. We should be able to understand the research gap at this perspective, at this point. Any questions so far? Okay, if there are no questions, I'll move on to the action. So the action is you telling us, of course, from the research gap, which of the gaps you want to look at, and I'll look at that in a few moments. Which of these research gaps are you looking at? Is it a data gap? Is it an empirical gap and all that? You must clearly tell us from the tension. Okay, so as much as possible, we know what gap you are trying to fill and the methodology or models or frameworks or whatever approach you are using to solve that tension. It's like you are now trying to solve a dispute, right? Or some people are having an argument that you have created within that particular output that you are giving, a poster or whatever. At this point, you are trying to solve it. Keep in mind that because you know what kind of evolving or relation that the characters may have. Of course, you have some hypothesis, right? So you told us in one line, okay, so you believe that in the relationship between the variables, there will be an evolving variable. You don't tell us from the beginning. You can make some hints, right? And then you surprise us at the climax. And then you say, oh, yes, I had a surprise for you. And that's why it was kept till the end. Okay, so things like the thing evolving from a managerial perspective to, let's say, a leadership or an organizational perspective, you can give hints with some of the literature that you put in and all that, but you don't present it fully. Or you can present it in a way, but kind of like a half truth, right? You don't say everything and you wait till the results, and then it will be like, okay, the one reading will ask, where is this particular character coming from? And then you now approach the reason for that is this. And then it makes sense, right? So it depends on how you present that gift or that package. You can show it to us from the beginning. By the time we get to the middle of the story, we've even forgotten about that little or minor character. But if the main character is going to evolve eventually, then you should know that how you show us this is very important. And that's where sometimes the novelty can come in. So how do you show us the surprise, or how do you unveil the surprise in the result session? Tells us your novelty. You could state your novelty before, but we will still have some pinch of doubt, right? Or some iota of doubt. But when you show the novelty clearly at the result session, it kind of makes sense, and everyone's like, okay. And it will even drive more thoughts of how this work can be done. And then further on your discussion, you are trying to justify the surprise with other people's work and all that. And then the implications of the study, you kind of show us, okay, at the end of the study, I conclude that this and this, and my further study is this. So this is one way you can show your academic output, whether it's a slide you are doing. So in preparing your slide, you can look at it this way. Your first slide gives us the background. Okay, it can give us the background because the setting is very important, where the characters will live. So once you give us that background, that scope, and that focus, then we always think of that only. We don't think of another situation, right? And then you let the characters come to play. How does the characters come to play? By telling us what your variables are, what things you are going to test for. Is there a possibility that they will evolve, and how they can relate with each other? Of course, having a control variable also kind of gives us what it's more important to test. Then you create that tension of defining the problem, okay? Because when the problem could be we don't know how one variable relates to the other, right? And then how is it done from perspective of literature already? And then you show us that gap. Okay, what has been done, what has not been done, you show us that gap. And then the action comes in by what your solution is in terms of methodology, how you are going to attack that problem, right? And then, of course, show us some novelty clearly with the results. Your results should show us novelty. Sometimes keeping the novelty to the end could harm you. Let me give an example. If what you have done or your results that you got, you realize that it's not so what you wanted to get. Like maybe you were aiming for an accuracy of, let's say, 90%. But then in literature, we already have 70%, and then you had an accuracy of 50%, right? That's not what we wanted, because the literature already has something better than you. So you don't argue from the point of the results. So you can do it this way. You can say that, okay, in trying to get the results, this is one way that is sure that somebody can fail. Okay, so you describe clearly all the processes that you went through, and then say that no, nobody should do this. Okay, so your novelty is trying to describe that particular sure way of failing. Okay, if you use this method, you'll fail, and then that will save others from going that way. And that's your novelty, clearly describing one way that the problem, or one way that you can fail, or one way that the problem can be understood from that perspective. If you use this particular method, it doesn't work. That's all you are trying to say. If you have that luxury of doing such kind of research, it's good, you can do it. Your novelty comes in from there, and not really the results or saying that my method is better than somebody's own, right? But of course, if you have a good work, and from the other point, if the results are not good, you can say, okay, further studies should not use this method, or further studies should explore other methods. That's how you go. So your novelty is you define one way or you've explored one way no one should use, therefore in further study we should use other method, right? But if you got very good results, better than someone's own, then you can come in saying that my method give this particular, right, better results. And of course, everyone should use this. Even if you compare my results with someone, my results is novelty. So in both ways, if your results is not good, is bad, there's still some novelty in there somehow. It depends on how you show that character. It depends on how you show the evolving of the characters, the relationship between the characters, and of course, how your results tries to answer the questions that you posed before, or the perspective or that research gap as much as possible. Any questions on this particular movie scenario of writing or showing your research? If not, I'll move on to a different approach totally. Anyone has a question, something I said didn't make sense, you want to clarify, you have a comment to add or something, you can always unmute your mic or type in the chat box. I'll give a minute for that. If not, I'll move on to the next part. Okay. I think there are no questions. Hopefully this is clear. Maybe this is from a business perspective. So if you are not from business, it may not really work well, but that's because the topic came from that angle. Okay. How can we show novelty in a proposal? Okay. So let me move on to the next part. Perhaps that may answer your question about novelty. But I just explained how novelty can be shown in two ways, right? The first way being that you got something, you got an experience from the whole research. It was not so good. So your novelty comes in from that bad experience, and you have to make it very clear, define it, why it did not work and all those things. You must clearly show us why it didn't work, or why you think it didn't work, or why it doesn't support your hypothesis and all that. That's when you get very bad results. Your novelty can come from clearly defining the bad way of doing things, right? And people will learn from that. That's one type of novelty, and it's not really for beginning researchers, right? Because we don't have that luxury. But on the other side, if your novelty comes in from exactly your results, right, then you can boast about it, compare with others. When you compare with someone and yours is better than theirs, it's a novelty. Okay. It could also be that your method compared to others have similar results. However, maybe your method is faster, your method is cheaper, and all those kind of matrices. You can use that. Okay, if I use this method, I use only 2 days. But if someone use their method, they get they use 1 week, but we all get the same results or comparably the same result. So use mine because it's cheaper. So you come from that argument of a cheaper way of resource, like kind of argument, and that's where your novelty comes in. But to attack novelty well, I'll go on to the next part of the session, and then we'll look at novelty and how best we can look at novelty from different aspects. Let me see. When we don't have any results yet. Okay. I think your question will be answered in the next part. So I'll stop sharing and reshare. So let me know if you see my PDF. Do you see my PDF? Can you guys see my PDF now? No longer the whiteboard. Yes, okay. So one way of also knowing novelty, right, is looking at it from this angle, the research gap angle, right? So what's the research gap? The research gap is what is the current status of the topic you are doing or that particular project. And what's in literature, there's always some kind of gap in the case that something is preventing your dream to be achieved, right? So you look at it from the gap perspective. Which aspect of the work can be done by you, but there's still not enough results in that particular perspective. So let's look at it from the evidence gap. So let me make this a bit bigger. Okay, so let's look at these examples first. The evidence gap. So when two studies are clashing, okay. So let me use the business again. For some people who are doing questionnaires, right? They use questionnaires for their survey, right? Some also prefer interviews. Some also prefer what other way do people use? Questionnaire, interview. Okay, so let's say that a lot of studies have used that if you use interviews to do your study, it's cheaper, it's more convenient, it's more realistic. You can get all your variables as much as possible from that, right? And the time frame is short. Let's assume that you have about 1 million references backing that. Then you also have about, let's say, 2 million references backing that. If you use questionnaires, okay, it's better because there's privacy, there's anonymity, and there's all those things. Okay, so both have come up with evidence that it works, okay, and it's good to use any of them. However, for your particular study, you have to make a choice. You have to make a choice. But because these two things are all looking good in the literature, you decided to use both of them. And then you made a conclusion after your study that showed that, oh, if you are doing studies related to, let's say, people who are not educated, right, or they cannot read and write, then it's better to use the interview approach. And of course, you have to translate into their local language, or let's say mother tongue, right? But if you want a wider outreach and you want, of course, the interview will give you that genuine feeling, and or you can capture all the emotions and all that, right? But if you use a survey, you may not get that. So you kind of bring a new definition of when a survey should be used or when an interview should be used. And that's your novelty. Both are right, or both are kind of arguing that I'm better than the other, but you kind of narrow it down to a particular situation where one clearly wins, and that's your novelty, where you are trying to fill in that evidence gap. Everybody brought their argument that survey is good. Another person said that the interview is good, and there's no clear understanding within that field. Okay, or if somebody doing that particular similar problem or project may not know what to do. So you bring in that novelty, saying that use this one, option A, if you are using this particular, you are in this particular situation, or use option B if you are in the other particular situation. So your novelty comes in by filling that evidence gap where the two studies, there's evidence showing that both are true, but you come in to clearly show that this works for this particular situation, or this works for this particular situation. This is one way your novelty can clearly even be without even having some results, okay? Before you start, you can gather the evidence like a lawyer, right? So 1 million is for survey, 2 million is from interviews. And then you analyze the data well, or whatever they have given you from the literature. You don't have results. So whatever they've said in the literature, you analyze it critically from different perspectives, and then kind of give your review. And then you say that this is my novelty. My novelty says that you use surveys in this perspective and you use interview in this suspect. You don't mix the two. Or if you want a better approach, use all the two, and then you kind of have a better approach. So this is one way. You've not done the work. You just look at the literature. What is the evidence in literature? Or of course, you can use the evidence from your study. So both ways, you have still solved that problem of there is that unclear decision in the field. Okay. Another example, some people prefer using Python for their data analysis. Some others also prefer using R. Some also prefer MATLAB. Some prefer SPSS, right? And this is floating in all the data science and statistics, economics, and all the different people who use data. As to which particular one is the best, no one can say that. And even for the next 20 or 30 years, we may not have a decider. Now you come in and say that with all the work done by Python, or with all the work done by R, with all the data analysis done by what software, where is one advantage more than the other? So you are using the evidence from literature, or you can now take that evidence from your study and say, okay, because I have 1 million data points or 1 million statistical points, I cannot use Python because maybe it crashes, or I cannot use R because it will become too clumsy. So you give that evidence to kind of say, you are now the final say. Everyone can now refer back to your work and say that, okay, according to the evidence from you, or according to the evidence you got from the literature analysis, it's better to use this particular tool for this, or use another particular tool for that. So with or without the data, you can still be novel by trying to fill in the evidence gap, because there's some unclear situation of which software to use or which method to use or whatever is clashing in the study. So here, if you are going for evidence, then you must be prepared. Make sure that you've read the literature extensively on that topic, and you can make a clear kind of argument that you are bringing in that decider. And from henceforth, no one should be able to have that confusion or clash again. I hope that works. Focus groups, I don't know where this came. Maybe. Okay, another way you can also bring your novelty is the knowledge gap. No one has looked at it yet. Let me add yet to the sentence. No one has looked at it yet from the perspective you are looking at it from, or from the lens in which you are looking at it from, right? I believe knowledge will increase. However, it's just a recycle of old knowledge, right? I don't know how that fits into your understanding, but knowledge is one. Okay, it's just one. No matter how you write one, it's still one. Whether it's 1/1, 2/2, 3/3, it's still one, right? So knowledge, I believe, is one, just that we are recycling it. So from that perspective of how you are looking at it, there is a gap. Nobody has looked at it yet from that perspective. So when you bring in that, then it fills that gap and you have that novelty. So you fill a gap, you are new. So which kind of gap you are filling, it gives you that particular say, or that particular authority. So a knowledge gap could be, for example, I want to do a transfer of technology, So I realized that in China, a lot of people use e-bikes, and it's more electric. Okay. I can decide to do this. I can go to a company and tell them, okay, can you export all these, help me export maybe at a cheaper cost or at a certain kind of relationship, such that you can send it back to your country, right? That's one way. Or you can now take the factory itself and their expertise and go and start a branch of the factory in your country, right? And then you'll be using the Chinese people or the Chinese resources to start. However, 90% of the man labor or the marketing and everything will now be your nationals, not Chinese people, right? And then they now will customize that e-bike to suit that terrain. Maybe it's a desert area, or it's a very muddy area. So you look at it that, okay, there was that gap of no electric bikes, but I can look at it from two perspectives. Just copy and paste. That is, I just export the thing back to my country, right? or I can take the whole factory or the expertise, or they just do like a branch of their factory in my country. Or I can look at it this way also, that I study with them, learn it, learn the technology of creation, perhaps sign some agreements with them, and then I now go back with my own resources and then develop the whole idea of, let's say, an African-based kind of technology and all, or blah, 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 and all that. So even though there's a gap in terms of executing the knowledge, I have 3 levels of novelty, right? One is I export, two is I transfer their resources to my country, or I just transfer their knowledge, right? So if you can do this in your particular study, that's also another novelty. Remember, you have not, if you have resources, then you can choose the last option. But if you don't have, you can leverage on that. So if you don't have the results, you can leverage back on what is the knowledge in literature hinting at, right? There's no results backing what your problem is, but it's hinting towards a particular direction because a few people have tried to solve it. And of course, if your work is novel, or the approach in which you are looking at the work is novel, you have less literature on it. And then from the 2 or 3 or 10 of them, as compared to the thousands, which is your theoretical framework, you realize that the initial test or the preliminary test done by people is hinting towards one direction. And that's where you are trying to fill in that knowledge gap. As much as possible, your knowledge gap could be just bringing up a suggestion or a hypothesis, and it could just fill it in that place, and people can further look at it. One example I'll give for a knowledge gap, or someone who is very good at filling a knowledge gap, is Einstein, right? Einstein is very popular because not because he did most of the experiment by himself. It's just because he said them. He said them or just wrote about them. And then years down the line, 40, 50 years, people have come to prove that, right? So he filled the gap by just saying the thing. He didn't do any experiment. He just, and that's why we say he's a genius. He just said it. And the people now came to validate him. So you may not have the results, or you may not be able to conduct that experiment to give the results, but you fill in that knowledge gap by giving a suggestion of how that problem can be solved. And if it makes sense, people will champion on it over the years, and then they will now give evidence to what you said. In the beginning stages, they may doubt, but with time, if what you said is really the answer, then you filled in that knowledge gap and the novelty comes in. A practical gap, okay, where the theory exists but practice doesn't. So we all know that we should do something, but no one has been able to do it, and you are the first person who should do it. So I'll give an example here. Water, H2O, shui. It's something that has a lot of things that we can do concerning energy, where even trying to store in terms of gigabyte, hexabyte, when we reach our limits of storage, we can store in terms of water. The structure of water can be manipulated to become a storage device. Okay, it's theoretically possible, right? Or we can go we can have an engine that doesn't use fuel, doesn't use anything, just air. So just expose it to air and it runs. Theoretically, it may be possible, right? But practice, we've not done it. So if you're able to create that particular existing thing that backs the theory, ditto, that is, it matches it exactly, then we can say that you have filled in a particular gap in this perspective of a practical gap. A method gap, right? Sometimes there is no method to clearly show how the thing is done, or we need a fresh approach. An example being that, okay, how do we do something? We are used to a certain way of doing it. We need a new way. We bring a new way and it works. Maybe you got that new way from a different area, a different discipline, right? So how can we recycle stuff? Okay, so we can just study animals and see which of the animals like recycling, like storing, like doing those kind of things. So maybe we look at the ants and then we find some ants, how they recycle their things, or Yes, so you borrow that into your study and you say, according to how the ants store or how they recycle their food or something or resources, you are using that approach or call the ant recycle theory, and then you put it inside your study and it fits in very well and it solves that method gap, right? A new approach means you have to get it from another place. Because if you are looking at it from the lens of your study or your area, it will not be fresh, right? So the fresh one always will come from nature or from some other discipline. Just move it from one discipline to another. And if it fits well, then you are good to go. Empirical gap, the proof is missing, okay? So we don't have a clear evidence. It kind of ties up to the practical gap. So the proof can also be a theoretical proof. We know the thing exists, but no one can prove it. It's like air. Air, we feel it around us, but no one can hold air until you kind of get vessels, you kind of measure the wind direction and all that. Okay, so when you bring in things that can help us show things that we know exist, but we can't prove, then you have solved that particular gap, right? A theory gap where the old theories don't just fit anymore, right? So maybe the way we build our roads, okay, in a certain way, we thought that human beings cannot go beyond a certain limit, right? So maybe we're only doing two roads, 2-lane roads, right? But with time, you brought up a new system of, let's say, a 6-lane road, and you show us how we can interchange and all that. That also gives us that novelty. And of course, a population gap where certain groups are overlooked. And this one it's the social sciences, it's the human sciences. It's easy to clearly see it. Most of the master students in China are doing a population gap or trying to fit in a population gap, but they don't know. Okay, so, or not, let me say China. Most of the students in developed countries are just doing a transfer of the technology and then they are trying to fit it into a population gap. Okay, so I think that for some of us here on the call, we should not have problems. Whatever you see around you when you wake up or you step out of your room, it's a solution, a project you can just fit it back into your wherever you're coming from, and it's like you are filling a population gap. So the studies have been done on international students living in China, right? What about a study being done on international students living in your country? You can follow the exact method the guys used studying in China, right? You can go back to your country and interview international students there. And then whatever study was done, you've solved a gap. Whoever wants to look at international students' behavior or what they think in your country is the novelty. Okay, of course, if somebody have not done that. So for a lot of the business students, I say that look around you. Look around you. Whatever you are looking for as novelty, you want a novel idea, it's just around you. Can you fill in that population gap? And if you check the literature, you realize, oh, from, let's say, maybe I'm from Algeria, and none of the studies concerning EV usage is looking at Algeria. Then you just adopt a whole study done in, let's say, Ukraine, and you just adapt it to Algeria, and that's a population gap, and that's you are filling that population gap, and your novelty comes in from there. Do I have results? Do I not have results? It depends on what kind of study. And of course, I've given so many examples using these, how to fill in the gap where you have a result and you don't have a result. If you don't have a result, you focus mostly on the literature and look at where it is hinting at or where is the evidence coming from the literature. However, you can fill the gap by actually doing the work by yourself, and then hopefully you're able to fill it. Or if you didn't fill it, you tell us ways in which it can be filled or it cannot be filled. There are others also, like geographical gap, right? The research is done in one area, it kind of ties to the population gap, or a temporal gap. Okay, so let's say COVID. There are people here on the call who is still interested in COVID. It's not bad. It's not bad, but I think the world is moving away from COVID now. So it's better if you don't put any COVID in your work, right? And we all don't want to think about the past that is not nice. So it's a temporal gap. Of course, within the 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, like it's been almost 4 years, right? And yes, there could be some research that could be done. For example, do people really recover from COVID? This is a study that could be done long term, right? The studies that show that even if you recover from COVID, the impact on your health is still forever. It's irreversible. So something like this, you can do it for ages. However, if you tell us what's the impact of COVID on the e-commerce market, it's kind of outdated now, right? So when you are doing novelty, know what kind of novelty also you are looking at, right? And being coming from Africa or emerging economies is kind of a blessing because most of these things are like 20 years ahead of such countries. So you can easily transfer as much as possible in terms of the resources, technology, and all that. So know what you are doing. But if your focus is not such that, or your study is such that you cannot transfer, you are supposed to be at the leading edge of the work, then that's where your novelty may be a challenge. And that's where you have to be creative. To be creative, just look around you, just look at nature and look at other disciplines. That's where you can borrow ideas. Like I said before, the knowledge is equal to one. You cannot deduct from it. You cannot add to it. So just look around you and borrow from another area. That's all. It's a fresh perspective. If it fits well, you can defend it well. That's it. If you are in a situation where you can borrow and send it back home, then that's good. The borrow and send back home is easier to do. But if you are in the engineering fields and you are in the places like computer science where you have to be doing the leading edge, then look at other disciplines and borrow the ideas from there or borrow it from nature. I think I've spoken extensively on gaps and how we can look at it in novelty. Any questions? Any questions on gaps? No questions? Okay. So I've been told not to push when there are no questions. So I'll move on. Hopefully it's sunk in very well. Another way of looking at novelty or presenting our idea, of course, if you don't present the novelty slide or the novelty part in your paper, no one really likes to read your paper moving on. So whether it's a slide, it's a poster, whatever, there should be a section or a slide that shows that your novelty is very important. Okay, let's look at it from this perspective also of how we get our novelty or how we convey the idea. The first part where we look at what we know, okay, or what we know. I don't know why it was put this way, but what we know that we know, okay, there are some things we know that we don't know, right? But here we are just looking at the first step of your work or the first step of conveying the results to somebody who is reading your work or listening to you is to present what we all know, right? We don't start from the unknown. So things that we can see, things that we have experienced, things that we kind of have gone through as a challenge or a problem or a scenario, you kind of paint it such that we all know that we know that one, right? Then we move on to the second level of our research. So if you're a researcher, you start from where you know, right? Then you go to, we don't know, we know, right? So we are discovering. We thought we knew, but we didn't know, we didn't know. What am I saying? But anyway, so we don't know that we know. That's what I'm supposed to say, not the one I said first. We don't know that we know. So it could be something you're experiencing every day until someone pops up and says, this thing, is it not a problem? This thing, is it not something that can be addressed? Okay, so let me see if I can give a very practical example for this. Okay, we all know that, let's say in China, the winter can start from as early as late October to somewhere in February, right? Or let's say March. Before I experience this, unknowingly, it's programmed in our mind. Then we discover that actually we can divide the winter into 4 parts. Okay, and we are trying to kind of do a research on this. realize in October it has a trend. Maybe it's windy plus rain, right? Maybe that's the first part. And then the second part is not windy, it's not rainy, but it's just cold, right? And then there's a third part where the snow comes in. And there's a last part where it's kind of going away. Okay, so we've experienced this all the while, or maybe something you've experienced your whole life until you realize, wow, it's a problem, it's a research I can do. Okay, so I'll give a personal example of a flooding situation. In where I grew up, it was always flooding. It was always flooding. Unless June does not come, it will flood, right? So until a friend of mine, we're doing research together and said, oh, this is their project on flooding. Okay, the project was flooding. How can we combat flooding? And then I said, oh, so what I've been facing, although I knew it was a problem, I didn't know we could do research about it. And we started brainstorming about it. So there are some things that we don't know that we know it, but it's embedded in us somehow. And we go through that discovery process. And that's what makes the study interesting. So at the beginning, you'll be like, oh, yeah, you are reading the papers, but at a point it will fade away because you are not discovering anymore. But that's a phase of the study, right? And it's very important. So in the first part, I forgot to mention this. In the first part, what do we know that we know? If you can clearly show us this, sometimes it becomes novelty. And everybody will not argue with it because even though it's something we all know, nobody ever stated it clearly in the literature. Okay, like I just said, if you agree with me that there are 4 seasons of winter, then you can write a paper about it. And if you don't agree, you can say there are 6 or there are 20 or whatever, right? Yes. And then we don't know that we know. So it's inherent in us as human beings to do that or to know that. You state it in the literature, it becomes your novelty. You are the first person to say it. Then there's that third part that we know that we don't know. And this is where the gaps come in. And I've spoken a lot about the gaps. So we know that we don't know. Tell us the gap and then show us how you want to solve it with your novelty perspective. And the last part is we don't know, we don't know. So it's the unknown future, right? As much as possible. I said knowledge is one. Even if you don't know that we don't know, we believe that we know something about it, or there's a part of it that we know somehow. Even though there's a fourth part of research where you are always clueless. Your supervisor doesn't know, you also don't know. You don't know why the results just doesn't work, or why the results even works, or why the code works even though you've hashtag or you've commented that line out, it's still working. You don't know why it happens, right? So in that level, you are not supposed to be in the fourth part as much as possible. Try and avoid this unless you are, like I said, in the leading edge of research or a field that is emerging, right? The computer science guys, the engineering guys, even the social science guys, there's a study you can go into where we don't know that we don't know, right? And it's kind of it's opposite to what you thought you knew, but you were wrong, right? So the fourth part can also be said like you thought you knew it until you discovered that you didn't know, right? And this is how you can also explore your novelty in your research. There are so many people on the call, so as much as possible, I cannot give all the examples to cover. So hopefully this approach or this kind of small 4 segment chart gives you an idea of how you can also show your work to others. You tackle it from what they know, so they can follow you. Then they go to that discovery, and that's like you are building the climax, right? And then you take them to what we don't know, right? We know that we don't know. So that's where the problems, you shoot everything at them and then you try to give them, now we don't know that we don't know. And then you tell us, okay, from my study, it's novel because what we thought we knew was wrong. And then all that. So you can also use this approach in your slides, in your PowerPoint, these 4 sections, and that is how you can convey your idea. Is there any question? Hi, thank you for mentioning the surprise. I was making a proof, but don't know where to present it. we're talking about making a surprise on experimental results when we are doing a presentation. How about in writing? Do we need to make a surprise in the experimental? This is a question. Okay. Yes, so for the surprises, you can go in two ways. Okay. The surprises, you can go in two ways. When you are sure you have the answer to the surprise, then you can wait to the results part and then show it and say, oh, it falls under what we thought we knew, but we didn't know, right? The fourth part, if you can still see my slide. So a surprise will fall under the fourth part, or maybe sometimes under the third part. So you have discovered something, and that's where your novelty comes in, because it's a surprise. A surprise being that we thought it could be positive, but now it's negative. Or we didn't even know what it would be, and now we've seen what it is. It's a surprise. Okay. So how you show it would come from how well your theory is good. Okay, so is there any theoretical framework or background that exists that you can put one or two together, like you are mixing them to kind of explain why? Okay, your attempt is just to explain why the surprise exists. It may not be the full picture, but you realize that in that particular surprise, if you should publish a paper or you should show it in a slide, people from then on will now try to either decide to follow you or also further investigate that surprise. And of course, maybe professors or other people, other fields would try and explore that particular surprise until there's some logical explanation to it. So the novelty started from you, but it may not end from you. So in dealing with surprises, that's the case. Or if you have theoretical evidence or you are sure why that particular surprise came about, then you can show it in your discussion and then give the exact answers to why it happened. And people will learn from you. And they may even inbox you later or send you an email on how best we can avoid this or also replicate that particular scenario. So we all know an example like when you drop something into water, it kind of ripples, comes, splashes at you and all that. Yes, for some people, they also study all those ripples. So you realize that different shapes come out. Maybe you are not interested, but for those who are interested in such fluid dynamics, they study the shape of the turbulence or that relapse or that shape that you think the coffee has splashed at you, but someone is in the lab trying to make the coffee splash or make the water splash and looking at different patterns. Sometimes you realize something comes out from the blue and you never know why. You can't even replicate it again. But it was just a streak of luck and you captured that moment. Okay, maybe you would graduate and may not be able to explain it, right? But once you've captured that in the literature as, okay, I don't know what happened, but I got this particular scenario. So guys, good luck in finding the particular explanation. And you realize 20, 30 years, somebody else would also likely get that particular scenario and now they can replicate it or they can control and make it happen one or two or three more times and we can say, okay, it's because of this and that. So for surprises, yes, we expect them, but how you answer it, either in a paper or slide, it's up to, sometimes you just have to be honest. I don't know the answer. I just saw it. Okay, if it was a mistake, then forgive me, but I also just saw it. I think it's interesting for the community. But if you have a very good theoretical background that can explain that, of course, you attack it from that part. Sometimes the answer may not be in your field. Just look outside another field and maybe you'll get the answer. I hope that answers that question. If there are no questions, I'll move on. Today we are fighting with time. Okay, so let's look at research methods.
Please, can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Hello. Okay, so with looking outside your field, how do you know what to look at or what to look for?
Okay. There's no rule. Sometimes it just comes to you like inspiration that what to look out for. But sometimes if you think about the problem hard enough, not the solution pops out at you. If you can think about the problem so hard enough, you get a solution just looking at you. It will come up from personal experiences. So how well you read. Okay, so if I tell you there's some solution in sociology and you are not somebody who is interested in sociology, you will never find it. But maybe that's what can help you. So you talk to people, like I always say on this call, share your research, talk to others. Nobody will steal your work. Nobody will steal your work. So share it with others. Okay, it's very important. Share it with others. Read wide. If it comes to you, it comes to you. If it doesn't come to you, then that's it. But trust me, like I said, knowledge is just one. It's not 1.5. It's your answer may be lying down somewhere. It's like you are looking for gold. If you find it, you find it. If you ask me how to find gold, I don't know. Just dig, right? So if you dig in the wrong direction, you keep digging forever. So sometimes it comes to how well versed you are as a human being, right? So let's not always be in the lab. Like music, okay? Like the sports, like everything. But as much as possible, speak to people who may have that experience in another field. So your roommate or your friend, or like I always say, the IE will tell you something that you didn't expect, right? Because of her own level of experience. And if you cannot find, then you can find in literature. And now, because you guys like ChatGPT, so let me add it. You can ask ChatGPT, how well can I look at, or in which area can I borrow this technology or this, or how can I solve this particular problem? Let's say, just say, how can I solve this problem from an economics perspective, from a computer science perspective, from a this perspective, and maybe ChatGPT can help you start in a good direction, right? So interdisciplinary research, it's difficult sometimes to know where to borrow from. And that's where we call some people genius and all that. But if you don't know, ask Uncle ChatGPT, he'll help you to start thinking about it. And also, if you are more of a well-rounded researcher, it helps you very well. And you can borrow things from different areas to make your work look very beautiful. Hopefully, I was able to answer that question. Okay, so let's look at some research methods. Okay, so you don't know what approach to use. Of course, you can converse with your supervisor or look at what is in the literature. But let's run through a few of them and see how sometimes we can combine, right? If you're able to clearly show us what research method you are using, sometimes we believe you, even before you're showing us any results. We believe you because you look like you are saying what you know, but sometimes maybe you don't know the full picture, right? So if you are using quantitative methods like experimental research, you should know the rules of that game, okay? In every experiment, you don't do it once, you must repeat, right? And there must be control variables. There must things you must set in place such that it doesn't look like the work was lack, but it can be repeated, okay? So you must know the rules for that particular kind of research. And once you're able to clearly show that in your slides or in your paper, of course, not everyone reads it, but if you can articulate it very well, then sometimes we even believe in the method without even looking at the results so detailed, right? If you are doing surveys, do you know how to do it very well in the questionnaires? Are you following all the check marks and everything for a survey? Is it 5 point, 6 point Likert scale? You know all the in and outs, right? In communicating your research, this should be very clear, such that anyone who leaves that presentation room can say 1 or 2 sentences concerning that particular research method, as if they are experts in that field, just because you taught them, right? Or anyone who read your paper can get something about that methodology and can also apply it in their study. Longitudinal studies. So for those who are into that, you know what it is. I don't know. Cross-sectional studies. So for those who are into that, I don't want to go into this and say something wrong. There's also correlational research. Let me skip that. But if you are into that, you know what it means. Casual comparative research. If you are into that, you know what it means. And then we have meta-analysis. So you take, before, like I said, you take what is in the literature. In this case, you are trying to interpret the literature. However, you are using numbers to do that, and that's meta-analysis. Quasi-experimental design, if you are there, you know. Okay, so these are ways in which you can explore your research or you use this approach to answer the question. However, there are just ways to answer. So there could be different parts of your research where you need to do an experiment, right? However, you are also doing a survey at the same time, or you are doing a correlational research. So you can mix one or two of them. Whatever you are doing, just make sure you can convey it as clearly as possible. Okay, if you are doing qualitative, then you are doing case study, ethnography, and all the ones listed here. The only one I want to talk about is observational research, which may take time. Okay, so maybe you have to count the number of drops within 1 second, or if you are counting the number of heartbeats or something like that. It could be, it's like quantitative, but here it's like you're observing the research to show that something is fast, slow, and all that, not necessarily using the metrics, right? So, or maybe you are into nature study, so you're observing how the animals would move within different sections, right? So that's what I just wanted to highlight. And of course, case studies, a lot of us do some case studies if you are from the business field. So if you are doing any of these, of course, you are also mixing qualitative with quantitative. Be sure that you know the rules of the game and can therefore explain it to someone who is an academic person or is in that audience. Because if they are also well-versed, there are some basic questions that they'll ask you and you must know. If you don't know, then it feels like, okay, then what is this guy saying? He doesn't even know what a control variable is. But he said he has done a study using surveys, right? Or those kind of things. So whatever you are doing, in order to convey clearly what you want to say, the method in which you use is also very important. And that's why I wanted to show this. Of course, some of us here on this call are using more than one, and you should know which part of the research you need to focus that. Maybe everyone does that particular study using a qualitative approach, and you bring a quantitative, and that brings the novelty also. So from the method aspect also, you are bringing a fresh look. So, or you are mixing qualitative with quantitative. And that could also give you some novelty. And of course, knowing how to share this with others is very important in your slide. So your method slides could give you a framework, and at each stage, you clearly articulate what you are doing. You should know this. Don't miss a step of the process, because maybe that's where the question can also come from the panel. Or the reviewer can just chance in on that and use it to chop your work into pieces. Any question on this? If not, we move on. Any question? Okay, so just on the research gaps again, this gives you a template. So if you have an evidence gap, this is how you write it, okay? If you have a knowledge gap, this is how you write it to address that particular. If you don't know where to start, this is just a template in terms of those writing. So research gap, the method, and then also we've talked about the plot of you plotting your write-up or that particular output you are giving, like a movie or a story. So we talk about 3 things today. Any question? Any question? All right. No questions. Then I'll move on to what are some of the things that the panel, so this one is specifically for thesis, so let me make it a little bit. So every panel has some, how do you call it? Marking scheme, right? So if you are doing your master defense or you are doing your PhD defense, if it's a good panel or it's a good school, they'll have some kind of things they are looking out for. Sometimes they will tell you, sometimes they may not tell you. They expect for you to know. So let's just walk through some of them. If you have questions, you can ask. If not, I'll just move on. So you are looking at your mastery or your command. So the command of the language, how well can you talk, right? You are not saying anything. You are saying the terms, the key terminologies, the things that if somebody is outside the field, they'll be confused about, right? You are using those terms throughout your presentation, not to confuse them, but you are using them rightly. This is one thing that a lot of researchers will look out for, a lot of professors will look out for in your presentation. Even if it's a writing or a paper, some of the terms must come, okay? Don't just use normal day English. There's a part you can use normal day English, but we want to see how well you can use the language. Is very important in terms of the key terms. We also have the extensive treatment of literature, relevant literature. So you can tell us, not that you know the name of the artist, of course you can know some of them, but you know the literature concerning your work and can give us like a 5 minutes news in brief concerning your topic. Okay, and whatever you tell us is actually the current status of the work. It's not that you tell us this is a solution, we now check the literature and maybe in the last 2 years, nobody's even doing that. Okay, so you must know the literature from what perspective, even if it's theoretical, methodological, in terms of the gaps also, you know it. Okay, you also understand and can engage in critics. Okay, that's why when you present, there's question and answers. It's not because they want to intimidate you. It's just for them to understand that you can defend your work. And I'll say it on this call, your supervisor should not be an expert of your project topic or your thesis topic. Nobody else except you should be a master of that topic. If your supervisor has been in the field for 100 years, he should not be an expert more than you. If he is an expert more than you, then that's where you cannot answer the questions. I'll give examples of how to answer I don't know questions, right? I'll give how to do that. But we assume that you have read the literature more than your supervisor concerning that particular topic. Remember, our literature review were tailored to answer specific questions. So those questions were asked by you and you only. That's where the novelty is coming in from. So you have read papers that answer those questions. Your supervisor have not read or may not know, or nobody on the panel should be an expert more than you concerning the topic. They may be the ones who brought the software that you used. No problem. You will not argue with that. But in using the software for your project, you are the master. What do I mean? Don't go there and shout at them. Don't go there and brag. Have control of what you are saying and don't let them intimidate you. You have mastery over it. And this is something they are checking. How you answer the questions is very important in delivering information to an academic audience. Sometimes it becomes a test of the ego. You say something that they think they know, but you politely answer them that they don't know because they thought they knew, but they didn't know. If you remember the last 4 segments we taught, right? So somebody can be an expert, but you should be the only expert concerning the project topic. Anything outside the project topic, yes, you agree you don't know. Okay, so this is something you should also look at in your presentation. Not go and lie, because when you lie, though, sometimes you'll be caught. There are some things that is very easy to see if you have experience within that field. Okay, also be able to interrogate some things you read, right? It's not everything you read and you say, okay, because they have done it is true, because people fake results, right? It's part of what we do as academics. You cannot take it away in one day. So sometimes question the results. Is it possible that this thing can happen? And if it's possible, how did they do it? And of course, you see things like we cannot share the work, we cannot share the code because it's a secret project. Such people, you should always suspect them. Because sometimes they don't even have the data themselves, but they have presented the work, right? But of course, there are some projects that you cannot declare because it's an ongoing study. But for most people who say that, they are lying. Okay, you should also be creative, okay, and how you tell the story. This is where the story part comes in. If you can tell your project work in a story form, you tell us the characters, how the characters evolve, what's the setting, the action, the climax, and all those things. Very important. And these things are all graded, okay? It's just 10 minutes, but it just takes 5 minutes. Like I always tell you before, it just takes 5 minutes for me to know if what you are saying, you know, you are convinced yourself, or you are just reading a script that your teacher even coached you to do, right? So when somebody is speaking with authority, They may not know everything, but concerning that topic, they are the experts, and you see it in the way they talk and how they exude the words, right? You can integrate your knowledge throughout the thesis, okay? So you know why you are doing the introduction. It's not because Mr. Bruce said, this is the format for introduction, right? You know why you are doing the introduction. You are giving us the background. You know why you are doing the literature. You are answering questions. You know why the methodology is there. You are trying to solve from your perspective. You know why the results are there. You are presenting your results, showing us surprises and all that, and you conclude. So you know how to integrate all the things you did. Something I want to add here is not because you did experiment 1 before experiment 2 in your work means that you should compulsorily show experiment 1 before experiment 2. Sometimes the logic doesn't add up, okay? Maybe if you show experiment 2 before experiment 1, it clearly gets someone easily to identify what is going on. So sometimes the logic is very important. Some of you may have very good write-ups. When I see the write-up, it's very beautiful. Although 90% of it was ChatGPT, no problem. But very good write-ups, but the structure is what is causing the problem. And sometimes the gold is in there, but your teacher will tell you there's no novelty in the work, but it's there. It's just because you didn't structure it well. Okay, so that aspect of integration of the knowledge is very important. And of course, I always encourage you, even if you are bachelors, try and publish something. Start from a poster, go to a conference, a report, try and publish something. If you're a master's student, don't say it's 2 years or 3 years. No paper publication requirement for graduation, so you don't do that. Evidence of published results is very, very, very important. If you don't know, it gives you marks. You are losing a lot of marks if you've not published anything at all concerning your work. It's very, very wrong, and it goes against you. You may get 80, but you could have gotten 85, right? And sometimes that 5 marks is very important because you don't know which line you are crossing. It could have been a 60, but you are 55 and you didn't pass. So just showing that you have published the work somewhere gives the reviewer or gives the panel an idea that, okay, this guy has gone through a certain level of rigorous review before. So why should I waste my time, right? Yes, so I don't need to really disturb him. He's good for the masters. So I believe that if you have just one paper, you can graduate your masters in any country, including China. Okay, so if you are not sure whether I'll graduate or not, try and publish a paper. Okay, if you can go through that and overcome it, it gives you a lower barrier height to getting or overcoming that barrier height to graduating. Okay, because sometimes it's very difficult to explain even your own thesis. But if you publish some part of your thesis, it could be a literature review, anything, it gives you that credibility that you know what you are doing, even though sometimes you work with somebody who wrote the whole paper. Okay, now let's look at argument. Can you make connections between the introduction, conclusion, and all that? I think this relates back to integration, right? And the arguments you make, and there are some arguments you can make because you want to win the argument, okay? But there are logical arguments you can also make because you want to probe further, like further research. And an academic argument may not be either for or against. Sometimes you are just in the middle. You don't know what's going on, but it's an argument you are brought up and you are trying to find the evidence, okay? Asking the questions is sometimes very easy, although some people say it's not easy, but it's the easier part because you can ask anything and everything, but which questions are relevant is what the people are looking at. How you reason is very important. The thesis contains an overarching perspective or the point of the argument you are making, right? There's a theme that flows through, or even if the teacher slept throughout the whole presentation, when he opens his eyes to see your conclusion slide, he can still grade you and grade you well. We need that kind of clarity that from the beginning, the story was one, and to the end, you never changed it. There's coherence, there's independence. You can criticize the work. You go deep into the work. However, you also go broader, right? And there's clarity and accuracy in your work. So I'll share this with you, so I'll not go deeper into that. I just wanted to highlight the first two parts, which I've talked about. But these are some of the points. So let's say this point is on 100 scale. You can ask yourself, even before you go to the presentation, which of them am I getting 0? Which of them am I getting 5? So if you've not published, know that you got 0 on that part, right? And try as much as possible to scrutinize yourself or avail yourself to a senior colleague to use these points to criticize your work. Okay, you can even give this to ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT, using this marking scheme, can you criticize my paper? Can you criticize my poster? Can you criticize my PPT? And let's see what your favorite friend ChatGPT will tell you. Any question? Questions? Questions?
Let's say, for instance, you are presenting to a panel that has no idea on your topic, like the whole what should I call it? The subject is an emerging subject, or it's not, but they don't have an idea on the topic. What would be the best way to start?
Here, segment 1. What we know that we all know, everybody in this world knows that something. Start from there. And that's how all your slides presentation should start from. Don't assume that everybody on the panel knows everything. Assume that there's always that Mr. Bruce. He doesn't know anything about your field. And want to ask questions. Start from the background. Set up the setting. Remember, from the movie perspective or the story perspective. Always, your first slide should capture the audience from there. Give them something that everybody must know. It's a must know. Right? So that's where you pull the audience along. No matter how they are tired, they will agree with you in their subconscious mind. They've asserted you already because they believe that whatever statistics you've told them about, that they believe also is true, and everything in your work is true. So let's just finish and let's go. So you win them from the start. The background, the focus, the scope, what we know that we all know and we all agree to it. This is where you start your presentation from. And it's the same for even writing. You start from a broad perspective. That's where you catch their attention. Then now you zoom into the specifics. And that's where you may lose them a bit. But in trying to do that, they may follow you small, small. Any other question? So you could start with a video, a short video that depicts the whole story. Okay, a 30 seconds video, or let's say a GJF, or what they call it. It's not emoji, the other name, the one that animated picture, right? That shows the whole thing. Okay, a picture, it says 1,000 words. So if your first slide is showing some short transition or something, a picture that tells everything, it gives them from the beginning, they know what, even if you can't say anything, they know what you are coming to talk about. They know something you are coming to talk about. And that's where you get them. And then they'll be following, they'll be like, oh, no, there was a surprise. And that's where the movie becomes interesting. And you sit down, they'll be following you. Because your novelty is new. It's not what they thought they were coming to hear. So that's how you can pull the audience along and your reviewers along. I hope I answered that question. Any other question? I think I'll take 2 more questions and then I'll move on. Okay.
I have another question.
Okay.
You mentioned using a video or a GIF or something of that sort. Is it allowed in academia, especially when it comes to defense? Because academia can be very strict, or it might vary based on let's say the setting.
Yes. Okay, so there are of course you cannot show somebody laughing in the background, right? So as much as possible, something just to convey the idea, maybe a news report. Okay, so for example, maybe or a statistics that's it can be clearly seen in the bar chart. Okay, so let's say you are talking about the effect of managerial makeup in the scale up, right? So you can just go for maybe a World Bank report or something of that sort, a chart that is so clear. You can see that when the managers are more, the startup force or something. So it may not be just a video, but depending on the application, just find as much as possible, but not all pictures, yes, can fit in the academic setting. Some pictures just don't qualify because of the quality, because of the content and all that. But we believe in statistics, we believe in figures that you drew by yourself, and you can animate the figure, right? And of course, if there's a video that shows the whole, so maybe you are doing things about electric vehicles, you can get some people driving electric vehicle or something quite academic, or you saw a very nice picture in the literature, you can cite it there and make it lively, at least serving as the background, okay? If nobody understands anything you say, they can remember the first slide, and that's where you get their attention span. So the first slide, tell us everything in there as much as possible, although there's surprises coming up, right? So you see the topic, you feel you know, you see the first slide, you feel you know, you see the specific focus, you feel you know. Give them that kind of feeling, right? Then you come to the literature, or they feel they know, okay, I've read this paper. In fact, she has even cited me. Okay, so if you are also very privy to information, you can ask who will be on the panel. You try and cite some of their papers, right? They are happy. And then you give them the shock. Okay, this is the research gap. Okay. And then you say the problem. Okay. And then you are like, okay, then this is how I want to solve it. And they're like, okay, now let's listen to her. So that's the kind of movement you move in. So they listen to you, they see the methodology. Oh, we know the methodology. Okay, she did survey. Okay. Then you pop up another surprise. Okay, this is what happened. The data didn't confirm, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so you are moving them through the cycle of category 1, category 2, category 3. We know, we don't know. We thought we know, we didn't know. That kind of thing. So you are just putting them through emotions, and then the 10 minutes will be up. They are human beings. They are not robots. Even robots sometimes can react to stimuli. So look at the supervisors like that. Look at the professors like that. Look at the reviewers like that. And roller coaster their emotions throughout the whole thing. You can do and say, part 2, I'm coming. Like a series, right? That kind of suspense. If you can build it up, it will help your presentation look lively, and nobody will really, they'll just give you the marks because you took them through a roller coaster, and they learned something because they thought they knew, but they didn't know. And you push all of them into the 4th category. We don't know that we don't know, right? Or we thought we knew, but we didn't know. So start them from the first box and push all of them into the 4th box. If you're able to do this for any audience, whether academic, it works. So that's how you should build up the emotions. Okay. Hopefully there are no more questions, so I'll continue. I think this should be the last part of the work today, or discussion today. So how big is your idea? Okay, we all have big ideas, the one we dream about, the one we are still dreaming about, the one we are yet to dream. But let's analyze or measure the bigness of our idea with 3 matrices, right? Is it novel? And I've thought about novelty today a lot. If you are still on this call and you ask me, how do I find my novelty? I don't have any other thing to say. I've said it from 3 different perspectives. Okay, so novelty, try and figure out by yourself using the 3 approaches I've given you. From the movie perspective, from the box perspective, that's the 4 boxes, and then from the research gap perspective. And of course, I showed you another one before, using the literature to analyze if your work is new or not by the number of papers citing that or answering that. So novelty is new experiment data. This one is very clear. If your experimental data is new, is novel, that's your novelty. It's very clear. However, there could be old existing data, but how you interpret it is the novelty. So if your data analysis is not good, or you don't see the data, you cannot see into the data, then there's a problem here. Your novelty may not come in here. Or you are using new analysis or you're analyzing new not new, or you're using a new perspective in your analysis to analyze things that we already knew. Okay, so for example, we can say that in every country we can find a Chinese man or a Nigerian. Yes, Nigerians are everywhere and Chinese are also everywhere. You can look at it from this perspective that the Chinese man is moving because he wants to impact, right? And the Nigerian man is also moving because he wants to impact. However, the level of impact from what you know, this one, I'm not going to say it. From what you know, you realize that we see the two of them differently. The way you react to a Chinese man in your country and the way you react to a Nigerian in your country is different because of what you know. And whatever you know is true. Hold it there, hold that thought. But then I come in and say that, no, there is a difference. There's no difference. Sorry, there's no difference. Even if it's positive or negative, they are all moving because of this reason. So now I'm trying to change your perspective a little bit, and that becomes your novelty. Even though I don't have to show you so much data. What you know, that thought I said hold. I just come and kind of give you a little bit of interpretation, right? Or from my perspective of how you know that particular thing is existing. It's a condition you are facing. And then I tell you a different approach to that interpretation. It could be your novelty. Maybe my Chinese and Nigerian man was not a good example, but I think it is. Okay, now your novelty could be only local. So you're a local champion, right? So let's say in Africa, you are the only one who has done EVs. You are the one championing the use of EVs, educating people how to do the fabrication and all that. So locally, but when it comes to outside Africa, you are a small boy, right? But it doesn't matter. Enjoy your local championship, right? You are the champion in Africa and it's okay. Africa is also a very big market. Or in that readership, or whoever you are presenting to that conference, you are the local champion. In your country, you are the first to do that. It's okay. Let's not compare with other countries. Okay. So that could be a novelty in that perspective. Or you could look at it in terms of a continent. Maybe in Asia, you are the first person. But if you go to Africa, maybe you are the second person. And of course, there's a global one, which we all aim to achieve. So in your research, first of all, we are in China. So let's ask, has someone done this in China? If not, then address your novelty that way. Don't let your supervisor force you to move to the third type. Start from China, right? And see how best you compare with Asia. And then see how best you also compare with the world. Start in that kind of novelty. Don't just jump and become global champion. And there's a saying that, oh, I've forgotten this. Something, act global, do local. I've forgotten what it is. Just keep my mind. Yeah. So you start, no, is it no global, act local, something like that. Whatever you know globally, you can start it locally, right, in a different way. And that could be your novelty. Now, significance. Is your idea big because it's significant? Okay, novelty and significance may not be the same, or even relevance may not be the same. So your assess based on the implications that the findings will have on the field globally, originally, right? It's significant because of the implications of the study, not just the study or just the idea, but the effect of the solution or the results you had on the field, either globally or regionally. And of course, relevant. Does the findings apply to a specific context or setting in and out of your discipline? And you are selecting a research methodology that can reduce when you are extrapolating. So if someone takes your solution and they want to use it in another field, is it possible? Then your work is relevant. So if your teacher tells you your work is not novel, okay, say Laoshi, I agree, my work is not novel, but it is significant and relevant. Tell them that and see what they'll say. And if they say it's the same, it's not the same. Okay. So sometimes let's not fight for novelty. Let's fight for significance, or maybe your work may be relevant, but not novel. Because if you use your approach in another field, it entirely works. But if you have a 3, then of course, that's where your teacher will be happy. And at which level of novelty you should know. Any question on this? Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Think globally, act locally. Yes, yes. So even your research do the same. So it's a study novel, which parts? Okay, not the entire study. Maybe somebody have done something you are leveraging upon. So a part of your work may not be novel. Does it have global significance? Is a study relevant to other disciplines or to the disciplines? Why are you doing the study? Okay, some of us, it's just because we want to graduate, but there could be a financial motivation, or there could be a personal motivation, like you have faced something that you want to correct for everyone not to go to that same thing. So this can also drive your novelty, significance, or relevance. What's the value of your research? Okay. We all dream for something to happen to us. When we go to the lab that day, all the experiments we do should fall in place. It's a dream. This is that kind of outcome we want. But sometimes there are time delays. We should also factor in that when we are planning the research or even communicating this. We should tell the people, it took me 2 weeks to set up the experiment, right? And I did the experiment for 2 whole years. But the data you are seeing on the screen today, it took only 2 minutes to get it, right? Let them know the whole process. And sometimes communicating it very well, they get to understand the value of the whole thing. Because sometimes just 2 or 3 points, and they feel that, oh, everyone can do it. But it took 2 weeks to plan the experiment. Doing the experiment, you did it 2 years, and just 2 minutes, you got the real results you wanted. So there was an outcome you wanted, but there was a time delay, there was a resource delay, there was other things that took away your time, right? And also, what's the likelihood of achievement, the feasibility, right? You should know this from the start. If you want to build an algorithm that can detect something, you should know the drawbacks of that particular algorithm you are using. If you are combining, you should know if you combine what happens, right? The efforts and sacrifices. Okay, so the value of your research is here. Tell us. Don't just show us the results and then, okay, it's just one slide. But tell us the pains you went through. Share it with us. Okay, share it in the research. Don't, of course, there's a craft of doing that, but don't just say everything. But let us know the value of your research. If you yourself are not convinced that your work is valuable, then communicating to somebody else, they will also not see the gold in that, right? So this also can help you to help us know the value. So if someone wants to do it, they know, okay, I need to also plan 2 weeks, 2 months, 2 years ahead of time to get the results I want. So these are my general tips, and I'll close from here. If there are any questions, you can add. If you are doing a PPT presentation, of course, try and use less text, okay? There's a rule for it. If it's more than 6, is it 6? I think 6 by 5, okay? So if there are 6 words on the line and you have more than 5 points, then you are doing something wrong. So 6 by 5 is the optimum, right? If you go below that, it's okay. If you go above that, there's a problem. So on the line, we should have only 6 words and then 5 points. If you want to use more text, then transition the text, okay? Let them flow in with the transitions. Use the PPT features very well, right? Give us a literature review table as much as possible, or give us the journey. Some people, if you want to talk about the work very well, you have one slide, one paper, one slide. Maybe you take 5 key papers answering your question 1. You can talk about them one slide, right? So that's 5 slides if you have the time. But you realize sometimes maybe in your field, if there's so much novelty you are bringing in, the work, if you combine everything, you don't get so many key papers to discuss, right? So you can put them in one slide and then don't cram everything there also, but just give us a table or a chart. Your methodology should also flow like a chart, use the transitions, and number your slides is very important. Number the slides. This helps the professor or the panel to be able to reference the slide when you're asking the questions. Okay, so they'll say, can you go back to slide 9? Okay, or slide 10. It's not like they'll say, skip, go back. here, not that one. Oh, no, here, no. So once you are presenting, they can also follow with the slide numbers, and it's easy to make up the follow-up question, okay? And it's very good also. It shows that you know what you are doing. Depending on your field, but as much as possible, when you show every picture, every data coming from somewhere, the reference should be below the slide. It should not show, don't show as references at the last. No. Show as the reference in that particular slide. So you can just draw a line below, like down, and just show us the slide in this APA format, and then you tell us, like, kind of you are in texting, but it's down. It kind of gives some credibility, even if the data is not correct. Okay, it kind of gives some credibility. So if I look at the data and I'm suspicious about the data, but I look down and I see that, okay, the source is from World Bank, okay, then it relaxes me a bit. Even if my interpretation of the data or what the presenter is saying may not be correct, just because the data is correct, I will not worry the person about it. And then it kind of adds to your credibility. Your table formatting make it very nice, okay? So I gave this example, if you can see my slide. When you are doing tables, you should not have the vertical part of the slide, and this is intentional. I made it for example. This particular line, the vertical lines must not show. You must make your tables without vertical lines. It's a general rule. If you are doing that it's wrong. Okay, headings, make sure they are consistent, bold enough, and we can see what you are doing. In your discussions, okay, what's the major gap in understanding? So your discussions, like, we should see this, the major gaps that were there before. You highlight the problem. Tell us your thesis, your hypothesis, or your research question. Did you answer them and all that? The research gaps, what's the way forward? This is how you tell us about your discussion. And every slide should have this in mind as you talk about it. Moving on. So I think this ends my presentation today. If anyone have questions, you can ask. If not, there are other resources in the PDF you can look through, and hopefully it gives you a fair idea of what to present, how to present. I know I didn't teach the art of presenting, right? But one thing I said I'll talk about is how to answer I don't know, right? So I don't know, it's possible to face such a situation where you've prepared everything, but then a question comes that is trying to take you off. So if you are well versed with the literature, you can say that according to the literature, this question remains unanswered and therefore can be a point of further study. I'll repeat it. If you are recording, you can record me in this part. So the question comes and you know that this question has not been answered, right, in the literature. You are sure of it. So you can say that this question here is, thank you very much for the question. However, the literature review or the state of the literature at this moment does not really clarify a take on this particular question. Hence, it's something I want to look at in the future, or it's just a point for further study. But if you are not sure, you can say the same thing, but you don't say that the literature does not. You say, okay, according to my review of the literature, my review, it did not allow me to expose this part of the study. So thank you very much. I'll consider it in my next study. So there's a difference. If you are sure, you say according to the whole literature, but if it's not, according to your due to time limitation and everything constrained, this question was not really explored in my review of the literature. However, it's a very good and interesting topic. I would like to review further. And if you are a master's student, you want to do PhD, you can say, would you be happy if I take this project with you? So then you try and pitch your supervisor. Try and get a supervisor there. Then he or she brought himself, so corner him there and then since he's the one who asked the question, let's go and solve it together. I didn't think about it. So if you are willing, I could be your PhD student or I could be your master's student for us to further explore this. If it's a conference, let's collaborate together. If it's a paper, you tell them, of course, you may not have the reviewer contact, so you can say, you use it for a further study. But as much as possible, always throw it back to them, okay, and make the conversation. And you see those smile and those make on all those smack, sorry, and all those things. But it's an emotional and a psychological thing. So always throw it back to them. Okay, so I didn't do the literature. My literature didn't reach that point. So yes, it will be an interesting project. I would like to do this for a further study. Are you available with your resources? Allow us to pursue this project. And then maybe you never know, you'll get your supervisor from there. Anyway, so that's all for today. In the questions, hopefully the questions should come now. If not, you can ask any other question, maybe what you want us to look at in the next presentation or next session. Maybe not what I said today. There's a general question you have. We can address it. If not, we can push it to the next session. But if you have a question on this session also, the floor is open. Should I assume the silence as no questions? Questions on what I presented today or questions in general concerning research, you want us to address it. The floor is open. The chat box is also open. You can ask. Okay, so I see Joel asked the question if the background can be a diagram. Yes, it can be a diagram if you can explain the diagram very well or relate it to what you are saying. Because maybe saying it with words may not be so visually stimulating, right? So you need something that can stimulate their vision or to agree with what you are saying, right? So if you want to talk about poverty, just look for some sick-looking child and then you put it there, right? And it conveys the idea. That's all. But at the end of the day, what you are starting with should be something that we all agree with, right? Even if subconsciously we don't even say it out loud, we all agree with it. Questions? Hmm. Any questions? If there are no questions also, you can say no questions so I can close the session. No questions. All right. So thank you all very much for coming today. We had quite a less number. But if there are questions, we will address them in the next session. All right. Thank you also very much for coming. See you all in the next session. Bye-bye.